Your background is in psychology, and then you got very interested in human origins, or the intervention theory.
Well, actually, the truth of it is, it started out hominoids, and I was strictly a hominoids guy for about 20 years, and it took me that long to convince myself that the hominoids were not, they were real, number one, and that what we were told were pre-humans, that these creatures that, the Australopithecines and the early homos were, what we were being told were pre-humans, were in fact ongoing hominoids, and that humans didn't appear clearly until Cro-Magnons at about 200,000 years ago. So how did Cro-Magnons get here? How did we go from Neanderthals, overnight in the fossil record, with 180-degree changes in all the physiology of the physical aspects of the skulls? That couldn't happen in terms of evolution. So at that point, I knew that humans did not evolve on Earth. It was clear humans did not evolve on Earth. But I had no idea how we got here. Now, at that time, by the time I discovered that, a book was out there with an answer. And it was called The 12th Planet by Zecharia Sitchin. And that book, for me, I didn't get it until about 1991. It wasn't brought to my attention. And when I read that book, The 12th Planet, I finally had an answer that made sense to me, that was logical and scientific and made sense for how we got here. And when I saw that, I knew that I had the front end of that book was the hominoid research, which the author, Zecharia Sitchin, knew nothing about. And he had the back end of my hominoid research, which I had known nothing about. So I knew at that point in the early 90s, after reading his book, that I could take my years of research into hominoids and weld it to, or blend it with, his research and his work, and I would make something that would be stronger than both of us had to begin with. It would make a richer and more original view of origins. And so that's what resulted in the book, Everything You Know Is Wrong. And as soon as I had veered off into that study of intervention, and I've since made my work, from that point on, made my work both intervention and hominoids. And then in the late 90s, so through all of the 90s, I was intervention and hominoids. And then in the late 90s, after my book, Everything You Know Is Wrong, came out, that brought me to the attention of the couple with the Star Child skull. And at that point in 99, I was not a UFO or alien guy at all. Not that I didn't believe in it, but because I'd seen a UFO when I was 28, just passing, overhead. But nonetheless, it just didn't hold my fascination the way hominoids and the intervention stuff did. And so at that point, I got the Star Child, and so now I have those three areas of alternative study, which is the hominoids, the intervention theory, and the Star Child. So it gives me a very wide range of interest and a very wide range of knowledge in the field.
Were you very into the von Daniken stuff and Velikovsky?
I did. No, I was very into von Daniken. I read it in '69. I was fascinated by it, but by then I was already hooked into hominoids. So I just read von Daniken stuff and I was like, oh, this is really fascinating, but I didn't see a connection. I was interested in hominoids, and I didn't see a connection at that point. I just could see that von Daniken was doing really interesting work, but I didn't see it as a path that I was going to follow later, a few years later. I just wanted to stay focused on the hominoid research, and that's what I was doing at that time. But yes, I was aware of Velikovsky. I didn't really understand about the electric universe at that time. I do now, but I didn't then. But I read it, and it was a little over my head at the time. I was still a young man, and I wasn't experienced enough to really get a good grip on what he was talking about. I did understand von Daniken. I did understand Sitchin when I read it. It just, by then I was about 40 or so, and so I was up to speed. But I just was following my nose. One of the real problems in this field is there's no way for someone who's young, who's coming in, who has curiosity about these things, to be any way formally educated in it. There's no course of study. You just have to follow your instincts, follow your nose. But when I was doing it, it was hard to get books about the various subjects that you wanted to do. And now with the internet, kids can just go hog wild. They can go crazy. So we're getting more and more kids. When I started out, if you saw somebody over the age of 40, when I first started speaking in '98, you rarely saw a face out in the audience less than 40 years old, because normally you have to get to about 40 to realize that you don't know everything about everything. When you're young, you tend to sort of pretend you know everything there is, even though you don't know everything there is. You're pretending to the world that you're really on top of your game, when in fact you're not. And it takes quite a while for that to wear off and for you to just admit, I don't know much about anything, and I want to know more, and I'm curious about this, and so you branch off. And how I branched off at an early age into hominoids, I don't know. I just fell across a book. I stumbled across Ivan Sanderson's book, Abominable Snowmen, Legend Come to Life, which he had published in '61, I think. And I read it when I was in university at college in about '68, '69, and it just hooked me. You have one of those seminal moments in your life where something just absolutely turns you on a dime, and you're just passionate and you're hooked, and you've just found a calling or a path or whatever you want. That's really kind of what happened with me and the hominoid book.
There was a book called The Gods of Eden by William Bramley, which is actually an astonishing book for its time.
I know.
Are you aware of that one?
Yes, I was. I met William Bramley. I was at a group meal with him and sat next to him at the table. So we had a good conversation, and he's an older man, older than me, and a very reticent man. He's not very talkative, but we had a conversation to the extent that we could, and yes, I am aware of it. Yes.
Yeah, I thought that was a very underrated book, actually, very ahead of its time in a way.
Very much so.
About the manipulation. So if you start off with the Zecharia Sitchin stuff about the Anunnaki, the Sumerians, and then you look at is there some off-planetary force directing it all? What do you actually think about that?
Well, I think personally, when I started out, I have to tell you, I believed in pretty much only what the Sitchin end of it, because that was all I was exposed to. I was exposed to the fact that we were created, but at that point, all I could tell was that humans did not evolve here. We came here. Then Sitchin pointed out in his book that it was much wider and broader than just humans, that all domesticated plants and all domesticated animals, we're talking about a few hundred species, all of those were also genetically manipulated to be here to, quote, as the text reads, to give the gods their comfort, to make life easy on this planet, which had to be a hardship duty for them, like British soldiers getting sent to the deserts of Africa or of India or wherever. Hardship duty, and you do your best to make yourself comfortable in this foreign alien environment. Yeah. Well, they were doing the same thing. They were making this planet more habitable for them while they were here, and it's understandable that they would do that. So when I understood that there was a lot more genetic engineering going on, it opened up my mind to the possibility that it was wider even than that, but I had no understanding of it. So I just kind of kept my eyes and ears open as I would read things, and I'd get a little tick here of information, a little tick there of information, and I just sort of started clocking them up in my head, adding them up. And over time, I began to realize, wait a minute, it's looking like this has been going on since the beginning of the planet. Now, what I had to do was separate the Anunnaki, who clearly, created us. Somebody created us, and the only written record we have is of the Anunnaki, but somebody did it. It's clear, if you look in our genome, we're definitely created. We're definitely manipulated genetically to make us. But it began to look to me like that all of life on Earth, and in fact, the Earth itself had been manipulated to be what it is. If you let a planet just sort of congeal out of the magma that it starts out as, if you let that happen, you get most of the other planets in the solar system in one form or another. You get the just rocky, dry bodies like Mars, like Venus, or they're all different, but they don't have the key elements for higher life, which are oxygen and water. Got to have that. So Earth looked like it had been, instead of allowed to become one of those dead balls floating around in space, Earth looked like it had been deliberately changed so that it could accommodate the trappings, all the things that go with life. And if you look back at the seminal events and what has to occur to turn a planet from a seething ball of magma into what it is today over those 4.5 billion years, there's certain milestone events that have to happen. And if you look back in the record of Earth, it all happens right when it's supposed to, right when it has to, for optimum, maximum efficiency for turning the planet into what it is. And when I began to realize that, I began to realize that there's something over and above the Anunnaki that seem to be controlling that part. So I call them the terraformers. But just for lack of a better name, there's no name for them. Let's call them terraformers because they're clearly terraforming the planet Earth to make it into what it is. And I have to assume that if somebody's out there doing it for Earth, they're doing it for a lot of other planets as well. So that, and there's so many billions of planets out there, stars out there with solar systems around them, that if this is your job in just the galaxy, I'm not talking about the universe, because the universe is filled with millions or billions of galaxies. I'm just talking about within our galaxy, which is in itself, millions of stars. Somebody's traveling around, establishing life. They are looking at this job that goes a billion years at a pop just to get footholds, just to get the prokaryotic bacteria from about 4 billion years ago to 2 billion years ago. They come in at 4 billion years, they dump prokaryotic bacteria on Earth, and they come back, or either they know or they check or somehow they know that 2 billion years later the prokaryotes have pretty much done their job of tying up all the loose iron with oxygen that they produce. So these beings, whoever they are, these terraformers, have no concept of time as we understand time. Time doesn't exist for them. A year, billion years, no difference. All the same. It's one continuum. So when you think about that, they are impressive by any measure. And then under them are going to be subcultures of other beings, subgroups of other beings, among which will be the Anunnaki. This is how I view it.
So when you started doing this to now, what's the difference?
When I started doing this, exactly as you said, the audience was generally, in almost every case, older people. Yeah. Very few young people were getting into it. The internet was just becoming popular. Again, we're talking 98. Everything You Know Is Wrong came out in late 97, and I did a few lectures that year, but mostly I was really on the road, 98, 99, 2000, like that. And in that time, it was just mostly older people. But now you go out and you'll see a nice sprinkling of younger people in there that we just didn't have before. So that shows you that young people are getting the message or finding it in some way and are enriching the core of the alternative movement, because those young people bring an energy and an enthusiasm and a proselytizing nature, because they're all good at the social media and all that, and so they find something that they like and they tell their friends, and it's spreading, and I see an uptick in the amount of interest by young people. I get regular emails from people who are saying, particularly young people, who are saying, someone recommended your video to me, and even though it was like 2 hours, I figured, well, I'd give it a try and I'd see how it started, and after 10 or 15 minutes, I couldn't stop.